I mean, it wasn't mean, it was just, it's two things. It was, why can't you read my mind about what I'd like?
Ali MacGraw was the it girl who had the world at her feet, only to disappear into a marriage that she now describes, at age 85, as a beautiful nightmare. We're talking about her time with the king of cool, Steve McQueen. But as it turns out, being married to a legend isn't always legendary. Her 5-year marriage to Steve McQueen was intense, intoxicating, and ultimately devastating. So how did a love affair that felt larger than life turn into something Ali later described as suffocating? Pull up a chair, because this story is messy. The fairy tale beginning. Let's set the scene. It's the early 1970s, and Ali MacGraw is on top of the world. Love Story has made her an international sensation practically overnight. She's beautiful, talented, successful, and married to Paramount executive Robert Evans. By all accounts, she's living the Hollywood dream. Then she meets Steve McQueen. Now, if you don't know who Steve McQueen was, imagine the biggest movie star of his era. Ruggedly handsome, effortlessly cool, the kind of guy who made everything look easy. He was the highest-paid actor in the world, known for doing his own stunts and living life on his own terms. Women wanted him, men wanted to be him. He was that guy. Ali and Steve met on the set of The Getaway in 1972. She was cast as his co-star, and from the moment they locked eyes, something ignited. MacGraw has described it as an undeniable chemical attraction, the kind of pull that defies logic and reason. It was magnetic, intense, all-consuming. But here's the thing about that kind of attraction. It doesn't care about consequences. It doesn't care that you're married. It doesn't care about careers or reputations or the lives you're about to blow up. Ali left Robert Evans for Steve. She walked away from her marriage, from the stability she'd known, all for this overwhelming passion. And honestly, in that moment, swept up in the intensity of it all, she probably thought she was living out her own love story, even more epic than the one that made her famous. They got married in 1973, and for a brief, shining moment, it must have felt like destiny. The wedding itself was relatively low-key by Hollywood standards, but the symbolism was huge. Here were two of the biggest stars of their generation, coming together in what everyone assumed would be the ultimate power couple. The early days probably felt like a dream. Steve had this raw, masculine energy that was intoxicating. He represented freedom, rebellion, living life on the edge. For Ali, who had spent years playing by the rules, climbing the ladder of success the right way, Steve must have felt like a breath of fresh air. He was dangerous in the most appealing way. But here's what nobody tells you about fairy tales. They don't prepare you for what comes after happily ever after. The intensity that draws you to someone can be the same intensity that destroys you. The passion that feels so alive in the beginning can become suffocating when it's used as a weapon. So what happened when the honeymoon phase ended and real life began? The career sacrifice. Picture this. You're at the absolute peak of your career. You've just starred in one of the biggest romantic films of all time. Offers are pouring in, and the world is literally at your feet. You have everything you've worked for your entire life. And then the man you love looks you in the eye and says, "Give it all up." That's exactly what happened to Ali MacGraw. Steve McQueen didn't just ask her to slow down or take a break. He demanded she abandon her career entirely. Remember, this is post-Love Story fame we're talking about. Ali wasn't just another actress. She was a sensation, box office gold. But Steve wanted a wife who stayed home, focused on him, and played the traditional domestic role. And here's the kicker. Ali agreed. Years later, reflecting on this decision, MacGraw has been brutally honest about what she calls this suffocating period of her life. She walked away from a thriving career, from opportunities that most actors would literally kill for, all because Steve wanted her to. Now, you might be thinking, why would she do that? And that's a fair question. But when you're in love, or what you think is love, you make compromises. You tell yourself it's temporary and convince yourself that your relationship is more important than your ambitions. You believe that if you just do this one thing, everything will be perfect. But it's never just one thing, is it? Okay, I digress. MacGraw has described how her entire identity shifted during this time. Imagine going from being Ali MacGraw, movie star, to being Mrs. Steve McQueen, housewife. Your identity, your purpose, your passion, all of it stripped away and replaced with, what? Waiting for your husband to come home? Managing his household and raising his kids? She did help raise his 2 children from his previous marriage, and together they had a son, Josh. And look, being a mother and / or stepmother is meaningful work. But for someone who had tasted the thrill of acting, the creative fulfillment of making movies, the joy of doing what she was born to do, being confined to a purely domestic role felt like being caged. Think about it from another angle too. Ali had worked her whole life to get to where she was. She didn't come from Hollywood royalty. She didn't have connections handed to her on a silver platter. She'd modeled, worked in fashion, clawed her way up until she got her break. And then, love story happened, and suddenly, the world was hers for the taking. Directors wanted to work with her. Studios were calling. She could have become one of the defining actresses of the 1970s. But instead, she spent those years making Steve's breakfast, managing his schedule, existing in his shadow. The world moved on without her. Other actresses took the roles that could have been hers. The momentum she'd built evaporated like morning fog. MacGraw would later call this period a nightmare. Those are her words, a nightmare. And the worst part? The sacrifice didn't even buy her the happiness she'd hoped for. Steve didn't become more loving or attentive because she'd given up everything for him. If anything, he became more controlling, more demanding, because he'd learned she would sacrifice anything he asked. And as if giving up her career wasn't enough, Steve made even more demands of her. The jealousy and control. Okay, let's talk about Steve McQueen's jealousy, because jealous doesn't even come close. This wasn't mild insecurity or occasional suspicion. This was possessive, paranoid, all-consuming control that seeped into every corner of Ali MacGraw's life. Steve monitored Ali constantly, and I mean constantly. He didn't just want to know where she was. He wanted to control who she spoke to, who she looked at, how she interacted with anyone around her. An innocent conversation with a neighbor, a polite exchange with a waiter. Even casual, harmless interactions became sources of suspicion. To Steve, threats were everywhere. And here's the part that makes your blood boil. While Steve was policing Ali's every move, he was openly unfaithful. He carried on affairs without much attempt to hide them and saw no contradiction between his behavior and the impossible standards he imposed on her. He could do whatever he wanted, with whomever he wanted. Ali, meanwhile, couldn't so much as smile at another man without risking an explosion. MacGraw later spoke about Steve's explosive rages, episodes driven by paranoia and deep insecurity. And yes, context matters. Steve had a brutal childhood. His father abandoned him. He was shuffled between relatives and spent time in reform school. Stability, trust, and emotional safety were not part of his early life. Those wounds didn't disappear when he became a movie star. They hardened. His fear of abandonment transformed into an obsessive need to control. Somewhere deep down, it seems he believed that if he could possess Ali completely, He wouldn't lose her the way he'd lost so much else growing up. The tragedy is that the tighter he held on, the more damage he caused. Understanding where behavior comes from, though, doesn't excuse it. Trauma explains. It does not justify. Ali felt trapped, dominated, and constantly scrutinized. She later described the marriage as living inside a prison Steve built around her. Every word was weighed, every action questioned, every interaction monitored. Imagine being afraid to have a normal conversation. Imagine walking on eggshells in your own home, always calculating what might trigger the next outburst. That isn't marriage. That's captivity with legal paperwork. And before we even get into the substance issues that would further unravel their relationship, there was another powerful tool Steve used to maintain control: money. The prenup and power dynamics. Steve McQueen insisted on a prenuptial agreement before they got married. Now, in 2025, prenups are pretty standard, especially when you're talking about wealthy people. But back in the early 1970s, and in the context of their relationship, this wasn't just about protecting assets, it was about power. Think about what Ali had sacrificed. She'd left her husband. She'd given up her career. She'd walked away from her own earning potential, her own financial independence. And then Steve made sure that even in marriage, she would never have equal financial footing. The prenup was a message. You're dependent on me. You need me more than I need you. And that power imbalance colored everything. When you're financially dependent on someone, when you've given up your career and your earning potential, leaving becomes so much harder. You're not just leaving a relationship, you're potentially leaving security, stability, the ability to support yourself and your children. Steve knew this. Whether consciously or unconsciously, he'd created a situation where Ali was trapped not just emotionally, but practically. When you give up your career, your financial independence, your social connections, your autonomy, what's left? Who are you when everything that made you you has been stripped away? She became an extension of Steve McQueen, Mrs. McQueen, his wife, his possession. And the truly tragic part? Ali participated in her own diminishment because she believed in the relationship. She believed in the love. She thought if she just loved him enough, supported him enough, sacrificed enough, things would get better. They didn't. It's a pattern we see repeated over and over in controlling relationships. The controlling partner creates dependency, financial, emotional, social, and then uses that dependency as leverage. Where will you go? What will you do? You need me. It's insidious because it happens gradually. One compromise leads to another. One sacrifice leads to the next. Until you wake up one day and realize you have nothing left that's yours alone. But there was another force destroying their marriage from the inside. Something they both battling: addiction and self-destruction. Now we get to one of the most painful parts of Ali and Steve's marriage: addiction. And this wasn't a one-person problem. Both of them were struggling, creating what MacGraw later described as a toxic cycle that slowly destroyed whatever trust they had left. Steve battled illegal substance and alcohol. Ali struggled with alcoholism. Two people fighting their own demons while trying to hold together a marriage already cracked by jealousy, control, and resentment. Addiction doesn't exist in isolation. It feeds on pain and stress, and both of them had plenty of that. Steve was haunted by insecurity and paranoia. Ali was suffocating after giving up her career, her independence, and her sense of self. So, they self-medicated. And this is how addiction wrecks relationships. The problems drive the substance use. The substance use makes the problems worse. Then the cycle repeats, spiraling deeper each time. Trust eroded. communication collapsed. Instead of partners supporting each other, they became two people drowning separately under the same roof. Ali was especially isolated. She had already stepped away from her career and social world. Now she was battling addiction without a partner who could show up for her, because Steve was sinking too. They weren't reaching for each other. They were pulling each other down. Then came another devastating blow. Ali suffered a miscarriage. It's the kind of loss that demands compassion and emotional presence from a partner. Steve couldn't provide that. MacGraw later said his emotional detachment during this time was one of the deepest wounds of their marriage. When she needed him most, he checked out. And hovering over all of it were constant rumors, affairs, trouble at home, tabloid whispers everywhere. Imagine grieving, struggling with addiction, trapped in a failing marriage, and then reading headlines about your husband's infidelity. The humiliation, the loneliness, the quiet despair. By this point, the marriage wasn't just broken. It was unraveling completely. So, after 5 years of this chaos, how did it all finally end? The breaking point. By 1978, after 5 years of marriage, Ali MacGraw had reached her breaking point. And honestly, it's kind of amazing she lasted that long. Think about everything we've talked about. The career she'd sacrificed, the identity she'd lost, the constant jealousy and monitoring, the explosive rages, the financial control and addiction, the emotional abandonment during her miscarriage, the infidelity. I mean, how much can one person take before they finally say, enough? For Ali, 1978 was the year she finally said it. The divorce must have been both devastating and liberating. Devastating because even in the worst relationships, there's grief when they end. You grieve what you hoped it would be. You grieve the time you lost and the version of yourself that believed it could work. But also liberating, because finally, she could breathe again. MacGraw has reflected on their marriage as a warning about what happens when love gets twisted by fear, control, and insecurity. And she's right. Their story is a textbook example of how even the most intense attraction, even the most passionate beginning, can't sustain a relationship built on inequality and control. But here's something interesting that Ali has also acknowledged. Despite everything, despite all the pain and toxicity and damage, that initial pull between them never fully disappeared. The magnetic force that brought them together in the first place lingered like a ghost in the ruins of their marriage. And isn't that the cruelest trick of all? That you can be deeply attracted to someone who's also deeply wrong for you? That chemistry and compatibility aren't the same thing? That passion and love aren't synonymous? You can feel an electric pull towards someone who's also destroying you. Your body can want someone your mind knows you need to leave. That's the complexity of human relationships, and it's why so many people stay in situations that are clearly harmful. Because the attraction, the hope, the intermittent good moments make you think maybe, just maybe, it could still work. But it couldn't. Not for Ali and Steve. After the divorce, how did Ali rebuild her life, and what wisdom did she gain? Life after Steve. After the divorce, Ali MacGraw had to figure out who she was again. And that's not easy after you've spent 5 years being someone's wife, given up your career, your independence, and your sense of self. She did eventually return to acting, though never quite recapturing the superstardom she'd had before Steve. And honestly, that must have been painful to realize, that the career she'd sacrificed, the momentum she'd walked away from, couldn't be fully recovered. You can't get those years back. You can't reclaim the opportunities that passed while you were trapped in a nightmare marriage. 5 years might not sound like much, but in Hollywood terms, it's a lifetime. The industry had moved on, and so had her moment. But Ali rebuilt. She found herself again. She worked on her sobriety, confronting the addiction that had helped her survive but also kept her trapped. She raised her son Josh, giving him the stability she'd been denied in her marriage. She eventually found peace, not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that makes room for it without being consumed by it. And she's been remarkably candid about her marriage to Steve McQueen. In her 1991 memoir, Moving Pictures, and in various interviews over the years, she's refused to sugarcoat what happened. She hasn't played the victim, but she hasn't minimized the abuse either. She's simply told her truth. That takes courage. Ali MacGraw has spoken with clarity rather than bitterness. She doesn't demonize Steve McQueen. She also doesn't romanticize the marriage. What she offers instead is perspective. She has described the relationship as a lesson in what happens when love is driven by fear, control, and insecurity. She has acknowledged her own role in staying too long and sacrificing herself to keep the peace. That kind of self-awareness, that willingness to examine her own choices without drowning in self-blame, is rare. It would be easy to stay silent, to protect Steve's legacy, to avoid the judgment and criticism that often comes when women speak honestly about their experiences with powerful men. But Ali has chosen honesty. She's chosen to tell her story, warts and all, in hopes that maybe someone else might recognize themselves in it. Maybe another woman trapped in a controlling relationship will read Ali's words and realize she's not alone. Maybe someone sacrificing their dreams for a partner who doesn't value them will find the courage to choose themselves instead. Now, at 85, looking back on that chapter of her life with decades of distance and perspective, MacGraw sees it clearly for what it was. A relationship that should have been a passionate fling, but instead became a years-long lesson in how love alone isn't enough. So what can we learn from Ali MacGraw's experience with Steve McQueen? Why she stayed so long? Let's pause here for a second, because this is the part people love to judge from the outside. Whenever stories like this come up, there's always that one person who says, well, why didn't she just leave? As if it's that simple. As if Ali MacGraw, one of the most famous women in the world at the time, just didn't think of that. Ali has been very honest about this. She didn't stay because she was weak. She stayed because the relationship was layer-yeared, confusing, and emotionally addictive. First, there was that magnetic pull we talked about earlier. That intense connection didn't magically disappear just because the marriage became toxic. In fact, it often made things worse. The highs were high enough to make the lows feel survivable. When things were good, they were intoxicating. Steve could be charming, affectionate, funny, deeply magnetic. Those moments gave her hope. They made her think, this is the real him, if I can just get us back here. Second, there was isolation. By giving up her career, Ali lost more than movie roles. She lost daily validation, independence, and a community outside the marriage. Hollywood sets had been her world. Suddenly, her world shrank down to Steve, the house, and the emotional weather he brought home with him each day. When your entire life revolves around one person, leaving them feels like stepping into a pod. Third, there was shame. Let's be real. Ali had left Robert Evans publicly for Steve McQueen. The affair was known. The marriage was heavily scrutinized. Walking away so soon would have felt like admitting failure in front of the entire world. That kind of pressure keeps people stuck longer than they should be. And finally, there was empathy. Ali understood Steve's background. She knew about the abandonment, the instability, the reform school years. She saw his pain, and like so many people in relationships with damaged partners, she believed that love could heal him. That if she stayed patient, supportive, loyal enough, he would eventually feel safe. That belief is powerful and dangerous, Because you can't love someone into wholeness. You can't sacrifice yourself into fixing someone else. Healing has to come from within, and no amount of devotion from a partner can substitute for the hard work of confronting your own demons. So the real question isn't, why didn't she leave sooner? The real question is how many people stay because they confuse compassion with responsibility. How many people exhaust themselves trying to save someone who doesn't want to be saved? Steve McQueen's legacy versus the private reality. Here's where things get tricky, especially for fans of Steve McQueen. Publicly, Steve remains an icon. Cool, rebellious, masculine, a symbol of freedom and confidence. His films are still celebrated. His image is still merchandised. His legend is carefully polished. Privately, the man Ali lived with was volatile, insecure, and deeply afraid of abandonment. Both things can be true at the same time. Ali has never tried to dismantle Steve's legacy. She hasn't gone on crusades or scorched earth interviews. She's never denied his talent or cultural impact. But she's also refused to protect the myth at the expense of her truth. And that matters, because Hollywood has a long history of preserving male legends while asking women to stay quiet about what it cost them. Ali didn't do that. She told her story calmly, without theatrics, decades later. Not to punish Steve, but to reclaim herself. And let's be clear, Steve McQueen didn't live long enough to do the kind of self-reflection Ali did. He died in 1980 at just 50 years old from cancer, just 2 years after their divorce. We don't know who he might have become if he'd lived longer. We don't know if he would have confronted his demons or softened with age. We don't know if he would have made amends or found peace. Ali did live long enough, and that difference matters. She had the time to process, to heal, to gain perspective. She had decades to sit with the pain, work through it, and come out the other side with wisdom instead of bitterness. Steve never got that chance. So when people romanticize their marriage, what they're really doing is choosing the legend over the lived experience. And Ali has made it clear which one she's standing by. The long-term impact no one talks about. One of the quietest but most heartbreaking parts of Ali's story is how long it took her to trust herself again. After the divorce, it wasn't like she immediately bounced back into confidence and clarity. Years of being controlled, doubted, and minimized don't just evaporate when a marriage ends. They linger. They change how you see yourself, how you make decisions, how much space you feel entitled to take up. Ali has talked about needing time to rebuild her inner voice, to remember that her instincts were valid, that her desires mattered, that she didn't need permission to exist fully. And this is where her story becomes universal. You don't have to be married to a movie star to recognize this pattern. Anyone who's been in a controlling relationship knows how slowly it erodes your sense of self. One comment at a time, one sacrifice at a time, until one day you look around and realize you don't recognize your own life anymore. Ali's fame didn't protect her from that. If anything, it complicated it. Because when you're a public figure, your relationship becomes part of your brand. There's pressure to make it work, to present a united front, to avoid admitting that you made a mistake in choosing this person. So when she talks now, at 85, about the marriage being a beautiful nightmare, that phrase is doing a lot of work. The beauty was real. The nightmare was real. And the damage was real too. The phrase captures the duality of the experience, how something can be both enchanting and destructive, how you can simultaneously cherish and regret the same chapter of your life. It's not black and white. It's complicated. And Ali's willingness to hold that complexity without simplifying it is part of what makes her reflections so valuable. Why her story still matters today. You might be wondering why this story keeps resurfacing now. Why people are still talking about a marriage that ended nearly 50 years ago. It's because the themes haven't changed. People are still being asked to shrink themselves for love. Women are still being told to choose between ambition and relationships. Jealousy is still being disguised as passion. Control is still being framed as concern, and financial dependence is still being sold as security. The specifics might be different. We have different language. Now, for emotional abuse, different frameworks for understanding toxic relationships, but the underlying dynamics remain remarkably similar. Ali MacGraw's story endures because it exposes how easily romance can mask imbalance. And what makes her reflections powerful is that they aren't angry. They aren't bitter. They're clear. She doesn't say Steve was a monster. She says the relationship was unhealthy. She doesn't say she was blameless. She says she stayed longer than she should have. She doesn't pretend love wasn't real. She simply acknowledges that love, by itself, wasn't enough. That honesty, especially in Hollywood, is rare. The industry runs on image management, on carefully curated personas, on protecting legacies. For Ali to speak plainly about what really happened, without trying to spin it or soften it, is a gift to anyone trying to make sense of their own complicated relationships. And here's the thing. Her story gives permission. Permission to leave even when you still love someone. Permission to acknowledge that a relationship was both meaningful and harmful. Permission to say, this isn't working, even when everyone else thinks you have it all. The lessons and reflections. Ali MacGraw's marriage to Steve McQueen isn't just a Hollywood story. It's a cautionary tale about identity, power, and what happens when passion replaces partnership. First, the career sacrifice. Ali didn't just step back from acting. She lost her structure, her independence, her sense of self outside the marriage. Compromise is normal. One-sided sacrifice is not. If you're the only one giving things up, that's not love. That's control dressed up as devotion. Second, jealousy and control. Steve's behavior wasn't romantic. It was possessive. Love doesn't monitor your every move or erupt over harmless interactions. And the double standard, where he could cheat while demanding loyalty from Ali, was pure power play. Third, financial control. The prenup, combined with forcing Ali out of her career, left her trapped. Financial dependence isn't just about money. It's about losing the freedom to leave. And once someone knows you can't afford to go, the relationship changes. Then there was addiction. Both of them were self-medicating a relationship that was already broken. Substances didn't numb the pain. They amplified it. You can't heal while staying in the environment that made you sick. Finally, the attraction paradox. Intense chemistry does not equal a healthy relationship. Some of the most destructive dynamics feel electric at first. Ali lost 5 years she'll never get back. But by telling the truth, she gave others something priceless. The reminder that chemistry isn't compatibility. Love isn't control. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Because not every love story is meant to be romanticized. Some are meant to be learned from. If you enjoy unpacking the real stories behind celebrity relationships, fame, and the things we're usually told to romanticize, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. New videos go up regularly. And trust me, there are plenty more beautiful nightmares hiding behind Hollywood's gloss. Drop a comment and tell me what part of Ali's story hit you the hardest, or if there's another celebrity relationship you think deserves a closer look. And if you want more stories like this, go ahead and like the video, so YouTube knows you're into this kind of deep dive. I'll see you in the next one.